For 2,000 years, no one has found it. One of history's most famous women, the lover of Rome's two most powerful men, Egypt's last pharaoh, and her tomb is lost. On August 12, 30 BC, Cleopatra died and was buried with Mark Antony. Octavian respected their wishes and allowed them to be entombed together. Ancient sources say the tomb was in Alexandria, probably near the palace. But where exactly? Nobody knows. Earthquakes buried large sections of Alexandria under the sea. Tsunamis changed the coastline. Islamic and Christian period construction built over ancient remains. 2,000 years of looting, destruction, and neglect may have destroyed the tomb entirely. Or it might still be there somewhere, underground, underwater, waiting to be discovered. Dr. Zahi Hawass, Egypt's former Minister of Antiquities, is excavating a Taposiris Magna temple, 45 kilometers west of Alexandria, a site that may have been dedicated to Cleopatra. Dr. Kathleen Martinez has found tunnels, found coins, found statues, but no tomb. Underwater archaeologists have found palace remains in Alexandria's harbor, but not Cleopatra's burial site. Why? Did Octavian hide it? Did early Christians destroy it? Can it still be found? And if it is found, if Caesarion's DNA can be tested, will the 2,000-year-old paternity secret finally be solved? Before we examine the current searches and evaluate the competing theories about where Cleopatra might be buried, we need to understand what happened in the hours after her death and what the ancient sources actually tell us about her burial. If you find stories of lost tombs and archaeological mysteries compelling, consider subscribing to join us as we explore more of history's greatest unsolved puzzles. Cleopatra died on August 12, 30 BC, by her own hand, using poison rather than the asp snake that legend claims. She was 39 years old and had ruled Egypt for 21 years. Mark Antony had died a few days earlier, also by suicide, carried to Cleopatra's monument after falling on his sword when he received false news of her death. The monument where both died was a structure Cleopatra had built as her mausoleum, a building designed to house her tomb and preserve her body for eternity, according to Egyptian religious beliefs about the afterlife. Octavian, who had just conquered Egypt and ended the civil war that had consumed the Mediterranean world for over a decade, found himself in an unusual position. He had defeated his enemies, but those enemies had chosen death over capture, denying him the satisfaction of parading them through Rome in his triumph. Cleopatra, in particular, had cheated him. She had been the prize captive, the foreign queen whose display would have made his triumph spectacular. Her suicide meant that he would have to settle for displaying images and representations rather than the actual woman. But Octavian was not simply vindictive. He was also practical and concerned with his reputation. Cleopatra and Antony had requested to be buried together, and granting this request cost Octavian nothing while making him appear magnanimous and respectful of the dead. Ancient sources record that he allowed them to be entombed together with full honors, that the burial was conducted according to Egyptian royal traditions, and that Cleopatra's attendants Iris and Charmian, who had died with her, were also buried appropriately. This was politically smart. It demonstrated that Octavian was not a tyrant who desecrated the dead, but a civilized ruler who showed proper respect even to his defeated enemies. The location of this tomb has been debated for 2 millennia. The ancient sources provide frustratingly vague information. Plutarch, writing about 130 years after Cleopatra's death, states that she was buried in a splendid and noble tomb, but does not specify its location beyond saying it was in Alexandria. Dio Cassius, writing in the 3rd century AD, provides similar limited information. The assumption has always been that the tomb was somewhere in the palace quarter of Alexandria, the area where Cleopatra had lived and where her monument was located. But the palace quarter of ancient Alexandria is now largely underwater, submerged by earthquakes and sea level changes that have drastically altered Alexandria's coastline over 2,000 years. The geological history of Alexandria is crucial to understanding why the tomb has never been found. The city sits on a low-lying coastal plain, subject to subsidence, the gradual sinking of land over time. Major earthquakes in 365 AD and again in the 14th century caused significant portions of the ancient city to drop below sea level. Tsunamis generated by these earthquakes and by others in the Mediterranean further damaged and rearranged the coastline. The result is that much of ancient Alexandria, including the palace quarter where Cleopatra's tomb was most likely located, is now underwater in Alexandria's eastern harbor. Franck Godillot and his team from the European Institute for Underwater Archaeology have spent decades mapping and excavating the submerged ruins in Alexandria's harbor. They have found extraordinary remains: columns, statues, sphinxes, building foundations, entire streets now covered by water. They have identified what they believe to be palace structures, probably part of the royal quarter where Cleopatra lived. They have recovered artifacts dating to the Ptolemaic period, including items that may have belonged to Cleopatra's court. But they have not found anything that could definitively be identified as her tomb. The challenge with underwater archaeology in Alexandria is enormous. Visibility is terrible. The harbor water is murky, polluted, and full of silt that makes it difficult to see more than a few feet in any direction. The remains are buried under meters of sediment that must be carefully excavated while working in water, using specialized equipment, under time. Constraints imposed by dive schedules and weather. Modern technology has made underwater archaeology more feasible, but still extraordinarily difficult. Side-scan sonar can map the harbor floor and identify anomalies that might be buried structures. Magnetometers can detect metal objects beneath the sediment. Remote-operated vehicles, ROVs, equipped with cameras, can explore areas too deep or dangerous for human divers. But all these technologies have limitations in the murky, polluted water of Alexandria's harbor, where visibility is often measured in inches rather than feet. The excavation process itself is painstaking. Divers work in shifts, spending limited time on the bottom because of decompression requirements and the physical demands of working in water. They use water dredges to carefully remove sediment, screening the removed material for artifacts and small finds. Every object must be photographed in situ, its position recorded before it can be moved. Fragile items like pottery or wood require special handling to prevent them from disintegrating when exposed to air after centuries underwater. The area is vast. The ancient palace quarter covered many acres, all now submerged, all potentially containing Cleopatra's tomb or other important structures. And the modern city of Alexandria sits directly above and around these underwater ruins, making comprehensive excavation impossible without disrupting the lives of millions of people. Dr. Zahi Hawass represents a different approach to the search. Rather than looking underwater in Alexandria proper, he has focused on Taposiris Magna, a temple complex located about 45 kilometers west of Alexandria. The name means Great Tomb of Osiris, and the site was an important religious center in the Ptolemaic period. Hawass's theory is that Cleopatra, who identified herself with the goddess Isis and who promoted the Isis-Osiris cult as part of her royal ideology, might have chosen to be buried at a site associated with Osiris rather than in the palace quarter of Alexandria. The excavations at Taposiris Magna have revealed intriguing finds. The temple complex is larger than initially believed, with underground tunnels, chambers, and structures that have not been fully explored. Coins bearing Cleopatra's image have been found at the site, demonstrating that she had some connection to this temple. A headless statue that might represent Cleopatra has been discovered, though identification is uncertain. The tunnels in particular are fascinating and frustrating in equal measure. Some extend hundreds of meters underground, carved through limestone bedrock with remarkable precision. The engineering required to create these tunnels suggests they were important, possibly serving religious functions, possibly designed as hidden passages, possibly intended as burial chambers. Some tunnels are flooded, the water table has risen over the centuries, submerging lower levels that might contain important finds. Discoveries. Pumping out the water is expensive and technically challenging, requiring constant operation of pumps and structural reinforcement to prevent collapse. The artifacts found at Taposiris Magna include not just coins and statues, but also foundation plates bearing Cleopatra's cartouche, pottery fragments from the Ptolemaic period, and architectural elements that demonstrate the temple was active and important during her reign. A limestone bust that may represent Cleopatra was discovered, though its weathered condition makes definitive identification difficult. Bronze coins showing her profile, alongside images of Mark Antony, suggest that the temple had imperial patronage and may have been dedicated to the divine couple. But 20 years of excavation at Taposiris Magna have not produced Cleopatra's tomb. The tunnels have been explored, but have not revealed royal burials. The chambers have been excavated, but contain no obvious signs of Ptolemaic royal interments. The coins and statues prove that Cleopatra knew about this site and possibly supported it, but they do not prove she was buried there. Critics of the Taposiris Magna theory point out that all ancient sources place Cleopatra's tomb in Alexandria, not 45 kilometers away. They argue that there is no evidence Cleopatra planned to be buried anywhere except with her ancestors in the royal quarter of Alexandria. Dr. Kathleen Martinez, a lawyer turned archaeologist from the Dominican Republic, has dedicated her career to the search for Cleopatra's tomb at Taposiris Magna. She became convinced that the tomb must be there based on her interpretation of ancient sources and her belief that Cleopatra would have chosen a site associated with Isis and Osiris rather than a conventional royal tomb. She has led excavations at the site for over 15 years, discovering tunnels, chambers, and artifacts that she believes point toward an eventual discovery of the tomb. Martinez's work has been controversial within the archaeological community. Some colleagues admire her dedication and the interesting finds her excavations have produced. Others criticize what they see as an overly specific focus on finding Cleopatra's tomb rather than understanding the site as a whole, and they question whether the evidence really supports the theory that Cleopatra is buried there. The publicity surrounding the search, documentaries, news coverage, popular media attention, has made Martinez famous, but has also drawn criticism from archaeologists who believe that science should not be driven by the quest for spectacular discoveries. The political dimension of the search for Cleopatra's tomb cannot be ignored. Egypt's tourism industry would benefit enormously from the discovery of such a famous burial. The Egyptian government has therefore supported excavations at Taposiris Magna and other sites that might contain Cleopatra's remains, seeing the potential for international attention and increased tourist revenue. But this support creates pressure for results, for announcements of discoveries, for progress that can be publicized and monetized. Archaeological work proceeds slowly, carefully, with years of excavation producing small, incremental advances in knowledge, rather than dramatic revelations. The pressure for spectacular finds can create conflicts between scientific method and public relations. Beyond Alexandria and Taposiris Magna, other theories exist about where Cleopatra might be buried. Some scholars have suggested that her tomb might be in the Fayum region, where the Ptolemies had country estates and where Cleopatra may have maintained a residence. This theory is based on references in ancient sources to Ptolemaic royal properties in the Fayum and on the fact that the area was important to the dynasty throughout its history. But no concrete evidence has emerged to support this theory, and excavations in the Fayum have not revealed any structures that could plausibly be Cleopatra's tomb. Others have proposed that the tomb might have been moved in antiquity, either by Octavian, who wanted to prevent it from becoming a shrine, or by later rulers who relocated important burials for various reasons. The Romans had precedents for moving important burials. The body of Alexander the Great was reportedly moved multiple times during the Ptolemaic and Roman periods, though its final location is also unknown. If Cleopatra's tomb was moved, the original burial site would reveal nothing, and the secondary location would be impossible to identify without documentary evidence that has not survived. Still others believe that the tomb was deliberately destroyed, either by Octavian himself, by later Roman authorities who wanted to erase Cleopatra's memory, or by early Christians who targeted pagan monuments and burials. This destruction theory is supported by the fact that no tomb has been found, despite extensive searching, and by the historical pattern of Christian iconoclasm that destroyed many pagan sites throughout the late Roman and Byzantine periods. The destruction theory is supported by historical patterns. Early Christians did destroy pagan temples, smash statues, and desecrate tombs that they saw as idolatrous or blasphemous. The tomb of a queen who had been demonized by Roman propaganda, who was associated with Eastern paganism and divine kingship that Christians rejected, would have been a prime target. If the tomb was in an accessible location in Alexandria, it might have been destroyed during the Christian period, its contents scattered or destroyed, its structure dismantled to prevent it from becoming a pagan pilgrimage site. The question of whether Cleopatra's body could survive 2,000 years if her tomb is found is complicated. Egyptian mummification was designed to preserve bodies indefinitely, and some mummies thousands of years old remain remarkably intact when they are discovered in sealed, dry tombs. The process involved removing internal organs, treating the body with natron salt to desiccate it, wrapping it in linen bandages soaked in resin, and placing it in multiple nested coffins that provided protection from moisture and physical damage. But Cleopatra was not mummified in traditional Egyptian style. She was a Greek queen, and the Ptolemies typically used modified burial practices that combined Greek and Egyptian elements. The Ptolemies were buried with more elaborate grave goods than traditional Egyptian burials, in sarcophagi that combined Egyptian and Greek artistic styles, with funerary practices that honored both cultural traditions. Ancient sources do not specify whether Cleopatra's body was mummified, embalmed in Greek fashion using different techniques that involved less desiccation and more use of aromatic substances, or prepared in some hybrid manner that incorporated elements of both traditions. Greek embalming techniques were less effective at long-term preservation than Egyptian mummification. Bodies embalmed in Greek style tended to decompose over decades or centuries rather than lasting millennia. If Cleopatra was embalmed in Greek fashion rather than mummified in Egyptian style, her body would likely have decomposed, even if her tomb remained sealed and undisturbed. Only Egyptian-style mummification, with complete desiccation and airtight sealing, has proven capable of preserving bodies for thousands of years. If her tomb is underwater, as it likely would be if it is in the palace quarter of Alexandria, the chances of the body surviving are minimal. Water destroys organic material, including mummified remains, over time. Even if the tomb was initially sealed and waterproof, 2,000 years of submersion would likely have destroyed anything that was not stone or metal. The underwater excavations in Alexandria's harbor have found many artifacts, but no preserved human remains from the Ptolemaic period, which suggests that organic preservation in that environment is unlikely. If the tomb is underground in a dry environment, as it might be at Taposiris Magna or another inland location, preservation is possible, but not guaranteed. Much depends on the tomb's construction, whether it remained sealed, whether water infiltrated, whether looters broke in and disturbed the contents. Ancient tombs that have been sealed for millennia sometimes preserve their contents remarkably well. But most ancient tombs were looted in antiquity or shortly afterward, their valuables stolen, and their human remains disturbed or destroyed in the process. The potential for DNA analysis if Cleopatra's remains are found adds a modern dimension to the search. DNA extracted from Cleopatra's body could reveal information about her ancestry, potentially resolving debates about her mother's identity and the extent of her Egyptian versus Greek heritage. The Ptolemies practiced extensive inbreeding through sibling marriage for 300 years, which would create distinctive genetic patterns that DNA analysis could identify and trace. Understanding Cleopatra's actual genetic makeup would help resolve questions about which Ptolemaic marriages produced which offspring and how much genetic diversity remained in the dynasty after centuries of incest. More dramatically, DNA from Caesarion's remains, if he was buried with his mother, could definitively answer the question of whether Julius Caesar was really his father. This would require matching Caesarion's DNA against the known Julius Caesar family line, which might be possible if remains of other Julius family members can be located and tested. The Julian gens was a prominent Roman family, and various members were buried in Rome and elsewhere. If burial sites can be identified and remains recovered, DNA extracted from those remains could be compared to Caesarion's DNA to determine paternity with scientific certainty. The political and historical implications would be enormous. If Caesarion was definitely Caesar's son, it would confirm Cleopatra's most important claim and demonstrate that she actually did provide an heir to Rome's greatest general. If Caesarion was not Caesar's son, it would reveal one of history's most successful frauds and show that Cleopatra's entire relationship with Caesar and her position in Roman politics was built on a lie that nobody could challenge until modern science made the truth discoverable. But the challenges of ancient DNA extraction are significant. DNA degrades over time, especially in hot, humid environments like Egypt, where temperature fluctuations and moisture accelerate decomposition at the molecular level. The Egyptian climate, despite being dry in many areas, has temperature extremes that break down DNA over centuries. Contamination from handling and from bacteria that consume organic material can make it impossible to extract useful DNA from ancient remains. Every person who has touched a body or artifact since its burial has left traces of their own DNA that contaminate the sample and make it difficult to distinguish ancient DNA from modern contamination. Successful DNA extraction from Egyptian mummies has occurred, but it is difficult, expensive, and not always successful, even with well-preserved remains. The best results have come from mummies found in extremely dry conditions, where desiccation was complete and where the burial chamber remained sealed for millennia. If Cleopatra's body has been underwater for 2 millennia or has been exposed to conditions that promote degradation, extracting usable DNA might be impossible. The search for Cleopatra's tomb continues, despite these obstacles. Multiple teams are working at different sites, each convinced that their theory is correct, each hoping to be the one who makes the discovery that has eluded archaeologists for 2,000 years. The investment of time, money, and reputation is enormous. Dr. Martinez has spent over 15 years at Taposiris Magna. Franck Godillot's underwater team has worked for decades in Alexandria's harbor. Egyptian authorities have committed resources and permitted excavations at multiple sites. The hope is that persistence will eventually pay off, that somewhere in all the places being searched, the tomb actually exists and can be found. But there is a real possibility that the tomb is simply gone, destroyed by earthquakes, looting, Christian iconoclasm, or deliberate erasure by Roman authorities who wanted to prevent it from becoming a shrine. The absence of any tomb discovery after 2,000 years of looking is suggestive. Ancient tombs that survived intact were usually found centuries ago, when tomb robbing was less restricted and when less care was taken to preserve archaeological context. The fact that no one has ever credibly claimed to have found Cleopatra's tomb, that no artifacts definitively from her burial have ever appeared in any collection or museum, suggests that if the tomb exists, it is in a location so hidden or so inaccessible that it has survived 2 millennia without being disturbed. The romance of the search is undeniable. The idea of finding Cleopatra's final resting place, of potentially recovering her physical remains, of solving ancient mysteries through modern science. These possibilities capture the imagination in ways that few archaeological projects can match. The media attention, the documentaries, the books and articles all reflect genuine public fascination with Cleopatra and with the possibility that something new can still be learned about her life and death. But the search also reveals the difficulties of archaeology in the modern world. Sites like Alexandria and Taposiris Magna are complex, multi-layered archaeological landscapes where centuries or millennia of human activity have created complicated stratigraphies that are difficult to interpret. Excavation is expensive, time-consuming, and often produces ambiguous results that can be interpreted in multiple ways. The pressure to find spectacular discoveries competes with the scientific need for careful, systematic investigation that prioritizes understanding over headlines. The tomb hunters searching for Cleopatra are operating in a field where success is uncertain, where decades of work might produce no definitive answers, where the greatest discovery of a career might remain forever out of reach. They continue anyway, driven by the possibility that they might be the ones to solve a mystery that has lasted 2,000 years, that they might find what generations of archaeologists before them could not, that they might bring Cleopatra out of legend and into the laboratory where modern science can study her remains and answer questions that ancient sources left unresolved. Whether the search will ultimately succeed is unknown. Perhaps one of the current excavations will eventually break through into a sealed tomb chamber containing Cleopatra's sarcophagus, preserved by extraordinary luck and circumstance. Perhaps the tomb is underwater in Alexandria's harbor, awaiting technology that can adequately search and excavate in that difficult environment. Perhaps it is somewhere completely unexpected, in a location that no one has yet considered because the ancient sources are incomplete or misleading. Or perhaps it is simply gone, destroyed centuries ago, existing now only in historical records and in the imagination of those who wish it could be found. The search continues because the possibility remains. As long as the tomb has not been definitively found or definitively proven to be destroyed, as long as there are archaeologists willing to dedicate their careers to the search, as long as there are institutions willing to fund excavations and governments willing to permit them, the hunt for Cleopatra's body will go on. 2,000 years of failure have not ended the quest. The most famous woman of the ancient world remains lost, and those who search for her remain convinced that someday, somehow, somewhere, she will be found.